Hi class, welcome back to Trope School. So this is actually the second time I'm going to be filming this video. I filmed the entire thing earlier tonight, tootled off to make my dinner, and then whilst transferring the files onto my computer, found that they were all corrupted and I'd lost all the footage. So I've had a couple of glasses of wine, naturally. I've got my emotional support blanket, and we're going to film it again. So when I first started this series, there were two tropes that I was really nervous to get to because they're the big ones. They're the ones that everyone gives a shit about. They're my two personal favourites. And those two tropes were enemies to lovers and today's class, which is friends to lovers. And as much as I love enemies to lovers, and it may be my favourite trope, I absolutely eat up friends to lovers. Like, I would get on my knees and slurp it up off the pavement. I just love it so much, especially if you give me childhood friends to lovers, like a slow burn friends to lovers that lasts like 10 to 20 years. So that's just a heads up to say that this video is probably going to be really biased because I love the trope so much, and I say that as if every video on this channel is not incredibly biased, but there you go. So let's just get into this. This is the Friends to Lovers Supremacy cult meeting, now in session. So at its core, friends to lovers, its basis really is a key component of all romance and all relationships, which is emotional intimacy and genuine emotional connection, which I think a lot of other tropes, it's easy for them to overlook or not develop enough. Like tropes where it's all a bit more bells and whistles, it's easy to just tell a story that's more surface level lust. Whereas with friends to lovers, the basis of their relationship is that they are friends, they already care about each other and know each other deeply, and romance then comes as a product of that. So it relies on this narrative that love is very non-performative. Because if you're friends with someone for a long time, there is no fake persona, there is no putting them on a pedestal of an identity that is not true. If you've been friends with someone for a long time, you truly know who they are, the essence of their person to their core. And so falling in love with that person is then believable. Because in order to fall in love with someone, you have to truly know them. If you don't truly know someone, then it's not love, it's infatuation or a crush. And because of this, because that whole concept is the basis of friends to lovers, I feel like it is one of the only tropes, if not the only trope really, where that guarantee of emotional connection is built in. Because I've said it quite a few times on the channel, when you watch a romance and it's enjoyable but there's something missing, you don't really believe the characters at the end when they declare they love each other. It's probably because they didn't prove or develop the emotional connection enough. You didn't believe that the characters know each other well enough or are compatible enough to warrant being in love and surviving the happily ever after at the end of the movie. You know, sometimes you watch a movie and you think, yeah, they don't last, they break up. I don't feel like you often think that about friends to lovers romance because the emotional aspect has been developed well enough. Because although I'm not reading fiction to experience more reality, I'm reading fiction really to escape reality, friends to lovers is the trope I think that is the most realistic, is the most grounded in what it is to fall in love in real life. Because friends turn into lovers in real life every single day. Especially there's a subsection of people who can only experience romantic love if it comes in the form of friends to lovers. Anyone on the demisexual or ace spectrum, they can only experience romantic love once they have experienced friendship or platonic love with that person. It's personally also the only way that I have ever fallen in love with someone, which again is maybe where my biases come from. But I think that's why it works so well as a believable trope, because to me, it is probably the trope that is most grounded in reality. Like a lot of romances you watch, they're very plot driven or they're very meet cutie, which is fine. I love all those things. But when they have sort of the armor of plot and like exciting, fast-paced events, especially in things like romantasy or like romantic suspense, all these sort of bells and whistles can cover up the fact that the two characters' sort of connection is quite surface level, is just very based on sexual attraction. Like, do you, as a reader or a watcher, believe these two characters are in love, or is it just because the author says so or because they say so on screen? With friends to lovers, I don't usually ever feel like I've been cheated. Like, I do genuinely believe they're probably in love with each other. And in the other Trope School episodes, if you have watched them, we talk a lot about setup of the trope a lot. Things like fake dating, there are very specific setups to the plot in order to get your characters in that situation. Whereas friends to lovers, there's not really specific setups. I mean, it's because it's really self-explanatory. It's just two friends who are going to become lovers. But that being said, there are, I guess, a few different flavours of friends to lovers. So we can talk about those. The first, which is probably my personal favourite, childhood friends to lovers. I am an absolute sucker for slow burn. Whenever I see someone say that they don't like slow burn, I'm just like, what do you mean? What could you possibly mean by that? Like, childhood friends to lovers is just the ultimate slow burn. It's like decades usually of slow burn. It shows that there's a really long-standing, deep, lifelong connection there, and I eat it up every time. So a perfect example of this is one of my favourite movies of all time, one of the most slept on movies I think of all time, which is Love, Rosie. It's also sort of like in things like 13 Going on 30, also Emma and Clueless that we talked about on the channel recently. They are both examples of sort of childhood friends turned into lovers. And then opposing childhood friends to lovers, I guess, we have like two people meet and it is instant sexual romantic connection, but for whatever reason, like one or both of them are not single, just life circumstances, geography, they are not in a relationship but instead enter into basically a really tension-filled friendship. So this is like the basis of One Day. Another criminally slept upon friends to lovers movie, What If, starring Daniel Radcliffe. Yet another underrated movie, which is Sleeping with Other People. And I would say this is also the basis of like Jim and Pam in The Office. Then we get into friendships. I guess this could fall into the category of childhood friends to lovers, but it could also just be between adult friends. And that's like that one person romantically falls from the get-go, but the other doesn't. And that's why they are just friends. So, for example, Bridgerton, Book 4 or Season 3, Colin and Penelope's story. Penelope, from like first meeting, is in love with Colin. Colin doesn't fall in love with Penelope for many, many years into their friendship. This also happens in the movie Just Friends, the movie Win a Date with Tad Hamilton. God, yeah, I'm aware how much I age myself with these references. And then we just have, I guess, a really, really genuine friends to lovers, which is just, it is completely platonic from both sides, and then both friends fall for the other, usually simultaneously. So like Monica and Chandler in Friends, Nick and Jess in New Girl, People We Meet on Vacation. That movie's in January. Cannot wait for that. Another criminally underrated movie, The Wedding Singer. That's the vibe in that. And also like the friends to lovers movie. That is what happens in When Harry Met Sally. But I'm going to make a statement here and argue my case. We say friends to lovers is a romance trope, but in my opinion, all romances will, or should, if they are well written, have at least some aspect of a friends to lovers romance. Because as I said before, like friendship, knowing someone truly deeply and emotionally is the basis of all good love stories. even if you take something which is pretty much the opposite, enemies to lovers, arguably like the furthest away you could get from friends to lovers, right? But even in enemies to lovers, the enemies are going to go to sort of probably reluctant allies. Reluctant allies would probably turn into like a reluctant friendship probably into friendship, and then that friendship is going to turn into the lovers. It's a snippet of that story, but part of an enemies to lovers story is probably going to include a friendship before going into the lovers. Fake dating that we talked about last time. Fake dating is often the catalyst to get the friends into lovers. So often in fake dating, it will be two friends who fake date for whatever reason. But in fake dating, if they're like strangers or just acquaintances that decide to fake date, then the proximity of the fake dating will produce a friendship, and that friendship will probably turn into lovers. Love triangles, we've also covered in Trope School. Very often the basis of a love triangle is that one out of two of the relationships is that it's a friend and the other person is sort of just a barrier in the way of those friends being together and realising that they want to be together. So although we think of friends to lovers as this very specific, holistic trope, I would argue that friends to lovers is just the basis of pretty much every romance. And the reason for that being is I believe that friendship is one of, if not the key component to a healthy long-term relationship. To be someone's friend means you truly know them, like you share the same sense of humour, the same morals, the same sort of ethics. You genuinely enjoy each other's company. You cannot be in a relationship with someone if you don't have that basis. Like, your partner should be your best friend. And obviously, you need a lot more than just friendship. The amount of couples I know who stayed together for so long, even though they'd sort of fallen out of love with each other just because they were each other's best friend. And so they just ended up staying in a platonic relationship. It's sort of the opposite of, I guess, the angst of the main angst of friends to lovers is you don't want to declare your feelings or date this person in case it ruins the friendship. Shout out Taylor Swift, Life of a Showgirl, because you don't want to lose an important relationship to you. I know so many people where they've done the opposite, where it's like you need to break up, but they don't want to break up because breaking up will ruin their friendship and they will lose their best friend. So of course there is far more to a relationship than just being friends. But I guess that is one of the key components, I think, why I think friends to lovers work so well, is because of the built-in like angst and the built-in stakes that come with the changing of a significant relationship in your life. Obviously, it's not life and death. Like in a romance, you were not being hunted by some like evil goblin, or we're not in romantic suspense where a murderer is trying to hunt us down. But the whole concept of you can lose your best friend if you take that leap is like a really real fear. It's something I've experienced, actually. I have like before dated someone who was a very close friend to me, and then when we broke up, they're not your friend anymore. So you don't just lose a partner, you lose a really close friend. So the stakes are high. They may not seem it, but like emotionally the stakes are really, really high in friends to lovers. And you get that point in friends to lovers that is just one of my favourite things in a romance. And it's that moment where there is that shift, especially if that person like tries to suppress that feeling. So that first niggle of romantic attraction, but it's like, no, that's my friend, no. And it's that sort of like lying to themselves, or that first moment of jealousy, or when that friend is with someone else. Oh God, inject it into my veins. I just love it. And as I was saying that again, I was thinking that's a key part of enemies to lovers, because it's sort of like, oh, I'm feeling romantic feelings for my enemy. But again, that is because enemies to lovers, a part of the journey of enemies to lovers includes friends to lovers. So it is that shift, that internal shift. And especially if there's a suppression of that shift, oh God, I eat it up. I just don't know how anyone could not like this trope. It's just so good to me. And like I say, this there's so much more to it than just lust and sexual attraction. So if we use like Jim and Pam from The American Office as a case study, I feel like there's few people alive on the planet who have not watched The American Office. But those first few seasons of Jim and Pam is like incredible, especially the first time you watch it. I'll never forget the first time I watched that. We were in 2020 in lockdown and I watched The Office for the first time and I was so hooked on their relationship. And it's not just because they clearly fancied each other, like sexually, which they did, but it was that they were each other's like closest friends. They were each other's confidant. They saw each other every day. They hung out every day. They deeply knew each other to their core. They were happy hanging out even if it was just platonic. And that's where the yearning comes into it. We discussed yearning if you watched The Summer I Turned Pretty video that we did last time. And I think Friends to Lovers allows for so much yearning because it's that slow burn and it's the slow transformation and it's holding yourself back out of fear of losing them. And Friends to Lovers, I just think it gives yearning so much better than any other trope. It's just so good. I just love it so much. And obviously, like I said, because I love this trope so much, I was quite biased. I was like, how am I really going to talk about the negatives when it comes to Friends to Lovers? So I did a bit of scouring in like comment sections on Reddit and in other YouTube videos and tried to pick up on some sort of common critiques, I guess, on the trope. So let's address those. So the first critique that I saw quite a lot was that people find Friends to Lovers like too slow or too boring. For me, I would say this is just personal preference. As I sort of mentioned earlier, a lot of romances are very plot driven and have a lot of bells and whistles on them. And if that is what you like, then yeah, a super slow burn Friends to Lovers like Love Rosie or When Harry Met Sally might not do it for you. If you're really into sort of thrillers, drama, like action, then yeah, like a really slow burn childhood Friends to Lovers might bore you. But again, I just think that's personal preference. Because sometimes when I pick up a book, like I need it to be really tropey and fast paced and just, I can't put it down. But sometimes I want a really deep, emotional, theme ridden, slow burn Friends to Lovers. So it swings in roundabouts really. To that argument, I'd say it's personal preference. The next argument that I saw a lot was that it like perpetuates this narrative that men and women cannot platonically just be friends, or like whatever sort of sexual orientation equivalent. So like a heterosexual man and a heterosexual woman, you know, two gay men, two gay women, whatever the case may be. If you have the same sexual orientation, basically, you cannot just be platonic friends. I don't think I've ever felt this way watching or consuming Friends to Lovers. I, to an extent, understand where this argument comes from. I mean, it is the entire basis of the movie When Harry Met Sally.
Is that men and women can't be friends because the sex part always gets in the way.
The whole argument is based on, can a man and a woman just be platonic friends? Which, by the way, of course they can. I have so many platonic heterosexual male friends. So maybe that's as well why I've never thought about this, because I know for a fact it's a lie. So I would never sort of intake it as a message, maybe. But yeah, even in When Harry Met Sally, I don't watch that and take the message of that movie to be men and women can't platonically be friends without them falling in love. What I take from that message is what I was harping on about before, is that the basis of all solid relationships are friendship. I also think with this argument, it's important to note the genre. Like, this is maybe a valid criticism, I think, if you're talking about all fiction, like all media in general. Like, if you never watch any genre of movie and two people of the same sexual orientation can't just be platonic friends, then I think it's a valid argument. But if you're referring to just romance, I mean, the whole basis of the romance genre is that you're watching to see two people fall in love. So if you turn on a romance and it's two platonic friends at the start and they're the two main characters, they're going to fall in love. That's just the whole basis of the genre. So I'm not sure about this argument. Obviously, people are valid to their own thoughts. I guess this might be one of the ones where I need other people's input. Do you agree with that? I don't think I do. Like I say, I do think it is the nature of the genre. So I'm not sure on that one. The next critique that I saw a lot of is probably the one where I'm like, yeah, I get what you're saying. And that is sort of the shift between friends to lovers only comes because they had a makeover or they had a glow up, which means that it's shallow surface level. I understand why people would make that argument, but I really disagree with it. And I think this would only ever be the case if it was really badly written or like a really bad movie. So my argument for this is, I think the perfect example would be Bridgerton, like Colin and Penelope. So Colin only really starts to think of Penelope, am I saying her name right? Colin Penelope. Yeah, Colin only starts to think of Penelope. I can't say her name. Colin and Penelope. Those 2 glasses of wine have kicked in. Colin only starts to think of Penelope sort of romantically when she gives herself a makeover, buys a new wardrobe, puts her acrylics on and a full glam on. And I think if you just sort of look at it surface level, you could make that argument. But really, if you understand the context of that story and their relationship, that's not all it is. And I also think, especially in childhood friends to lovers, which is what Colin and Penelope are, like if you grew up with someone, especially if you knew them sort of like prepubescently, you don't see them as a sexual being at all. It might take that person glowing up to shift something in your brain, but that's not to say that it's purely sexual and surface level. Like there's a trend on TikTok at the minute where girls are showing like the before and after glow-ups of their boyfriends. And at the beginning, these men are like someone you'd never look twice at. They're like really dweeby, like shit haircuts, don't take care of themselves. And then it shows the glow up and they're just like, they're really in good physical shape. You know, they've just like taken care of themselves. They got a good haircut. They're dressing well, whatever it is. But like, I get it. And people probably come at me for sounding shallow saying this, but there's a reason that we fancy attractive people and people who are like athletic and take care of themselves. It's because they take care of themselves. They care enough about their appearance. They care how they're perceived to the world, which means they probably give a shit about other stuff and they're probably going to give a shit about like looking after you. Whereas if someone is really unhealthy but doesn't care enough to make themselves healthy, like goes out dressed like a slob and doesn't care how they are perceived to the world, like, well, what else don't you care about? There is like a reason why we are attracted to people who care about their appearance. And you can imagine if you were friends with someone from a really young age and you thought of them just platonically and then they suddenly glowed up, it would shift something in your brain chemistry.
You're looking way too hot right now.
In the movie Just Friends with Ryan Reynolds, at the beginning of that movie, it's like it is childhood friends to lovers. They're like high school best friends. And when he's younger, he's in like a fat suit, which obviously is really problematic. And I don't think it's a thing that really happens these days. But he's sort of like nerdy and simpy. And he goes off, they don't see each other for years. And then when he comes back, he's Ryan Reynolds. But the glow up is not what turns them into lovers. Like what turns them into lovers is the distance in time, his self-confidence, the fact that he puts himself out there to try and turn from friends to lovers. But ultimately what makes her love him is the basis of their friendship from when they were kids. It's who he is at his core, how he's a nice person, how he cares for her, how much he loves her. So whilst I understand how this could be problematic if done badly, I don't necessarily think a makeover or a glow-up is problematic. I actually think it is a catalyst that's quite realistic. But I guess you can all come at me for that one. And then the last critique, I guess, was a bit linked to that, which was that the switch up, like what makes someone suddenly develop romantic feelings for their friend, was not believable enough or not significant enough to be believable. This one, again, I guess I could agree with, but I will bring back to that's the difference between like a well-written story and a badly written story. In essence, I suppose there should be a warranted reason why you would suddenly develop romantic feelings for your friend. But at the same time, like, not necessarily. It can be very slow and very confusing and not one isolated event. In fact, one isolated event doesn't really make sense because it is a super slow burn changing thing. And I think that's what brings in the angst of when that person finally realises, because it's been such a slow changing thing, it's not been one isolated event. And I think that's why I love Childhood Friends to Lovers so much, to keep going on about it. Because in Childhood Friends to Lovers, it makes sense to go from someone you've known your entire life, like prepubescent, before you're like sexually or romantically aware, to then go to a place where you're like, hang on, am I just in love with this person platonically because they're my best friend? Or am I sort of romantically in love with them? Because, like I say, if friendship is the foundation of all good romances, then there is probably quite a fine line between platonic and romantic love to an extent. So, yeah, for that, again, I would just bring that down to good and bad writing or a good and bad movie. But I'd be interested to know what you guys think about that, about the catalyst for change. Do you think it should be sort of a sudden isolated event? Or are you like me, thinking it shouldn't really be one reason? It is just a slow burn change of feelings that doesn't necessarily make sense. But I think I've said my piece on Friends to Lovers, guys. Again, in the comments, let me know what your favourite Friends to Lovers stories are. If you don't like Friends to Lovers, well, you're probably not at this point in the video, but if you are, let me know what your criticisms of it would be, because I am quite like blindsided by my love for it, that I can't really see its faults. And if you have been following along on this series or just on the channel in general, then you might be interested in the newsletter that I'm just launching. It's going to be a monthly newsletter. It's called the Monthly Obsessions, and on the last day of every month, so the first newsletter will go out on the 31st of October on Halloween, and it's just going to be a roundup of everything that I've been obsessing over the course of the month. So that's whatever books I've been reading, shows I've been watching, movies I've been watching, music I've been listening to, and just other sort of little life joys. So if you give a shit about what I have to say, then you can subscribe to the newsletter free of charge. It's going to be hosted on Substack, but you can pop your email in. There'll be a link in the description box below, and you can follow me along on the Monthly Obsessions. And I will see you guys in the next video. Class dismissed.